What is good, my ex-homeschooler friends? It's your boy Jacob Gooden, and we're back for I would argue the best homeschool alumni podcast this side of the internet. I know that's tooting my own horn a little bit, but it's the only one I'm really aware of, so I think it's fair for me to call it the best. But as always, I am super excited for today because I've got a new ex-homie friend, and we'll get to them in just a second. But you've probably heard me talk about the Coalition for Responsible Home Education quite a bit on this podcast, and you know that I love what they do. And so I'm very honored today. Dr. Jonah Stewart is joining us, and we're going to touch on his homeschool journey. We're going to touch on like adulthood, getting into what they do now, and then the involvement in CRHE and really what Jonah is like responsible for, and some of the incredible things that are happening there. So, without further ado, Dr. Jonah, welcome to the Ex-Homeschoolers Club. It is an honor and a privilege to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. And I definitely relate to being, the best and being the only at the same time, because CRHE, we're kind of one of one right now.
Yeah.
But I think your podcast would stand on its own just fine with much competition. So,
Well, thank you. So let's get right into it. Tell me a little bit about like your homeschool experience. Like, how long were you homeschooled? Did you have siblings homeschooled as well? Where were you homeschooled? Like, kind of paint the picture for us a little bit.
yeah, I was homeschooled kind of everywhere and nowhere. So we were homeschooled on and off. Generally, as a shorthand, I'll say second through eighth grade, but there were kind of some dips in between, and a little bit of ninth grade actually kind of was technically homeschool. My family moved around a lot. My father is he's an apologist, a Christian kind of influencer is the best way to kind of describe it. Boomer influencer. And he was out speaking a lot, and we were always in motion. So homeschooling from a logistical perspective kind of made sense. Of course, there was the religious motivation. That was a very kind of fundamental part of it, but it also just kind of happened to be the easiest option available to us. I have one sister, younger sister. We were both homeschooled. She's 3 years younger, so her kind of dosage, as I like to call it, is a little bit different. She entered public school in fifth grade, whereas I, for the most part, made my transition to public school in eighth grade. And there are some pretty significant differences there developmentally, obviously. We lived all around. My mother's Australian, so we were partially homeschooled in Australia, in the Gold Coast, Sunshine Coast in Australia, homeschooled in Southern California. We lived in Iowa for a stint. So kind of, I got a pretty varied kind of sample of what homeschooling can be in lots of different places, in lots of different communities.
It's interesting because I don't think of homeschooling really as being like an international thing. I know that it does
Yeah,
exist in other countries, but like there are some countries that it's just illegal to do
flat
that.
out.
And
Yep.
so yeah, so I mean, I guess walk me through a little bit of like, was there any structure to like your homeschool? I don't know, like does your mom have like an education background at all, or was it very much like a wing it situation?
I also like how you picked up on without even kind of, thinking that it was my mom doing it. Of course, there are situations where it's both parents or a father who's predominantly
Right.
homeschooling, but just to put my research hat on, one thing we know, we don't know as much as we want to about homeschooling, but one thing we do know is that it is predominantly mothers almost all the time who are in charge of the
Yeah.
education process. And I was no exception. My mother definitely oversaw our education. We used accelerated Christian education, which it's a little bit, sometimes I feel a little bit like an outsider because most of the fundies use the Becca. But,
Mhm.
ACE is certainly in a league of its own. It is a curriculum that's received a lot of heat. There's been some research done on it that is pretty damning, and actually in some countries where it was pretty common have walked back their
Yeah.
accreditation of it. It's the way that ACE is structured is it's supposed to kind of be a full education out of the box. You don't
Right.
necessarily have to, as the educator, do all that much engagement. It's all the booklets are supposed to kind of independently educate the children. So my mother was certainly engaged, and I credit my mom for a lot of my intellectual curiosity. She's a really avid reader. And that's something that I picked up. We read very different things. She likes fiction. I am really boring and bleak and only like nonfiction. But I uh, definitely got a lot of my academic appetite and all that from her, but it wasn't from the curriculum. The curriculum left a lot to be desired. It
Right.
relied a lot on rote memorization. Obviously, if you're working with a booklet, you're not really interacting with it. So if, there's an essay assignment, they were pretty rare, but, when there was one, no one would really read it.
Right.
I
Right.
mean, my mother would, but there wasn't, any expectation of her actually going in and really making it a conversation. So the curriculum itself was a pretty lonely and kind of uh, thin experience of schooling. And also this curriculum. One just hilarious thing about it, whenever I introduce it to people who don't really know much about homeschooling, I just show them the comic strips.
Yep.
So it's a Christian curriculum that has little kind of like almost like parables at the end of each section. They're in a comic strip, and all the characters kind of Pilgrim's Progress esque. Like they represent different morals. There's Ace Virtueson, Christy Lovejoy, Ronnie Vane, Susie Southwell. We have our antagonists, and they're always kind of there's a little like moral lesson at the end of every unit, and that's those are very fun. There's some great memes about them. So that's usually my way of explaining it. But typical day would be I'm pretty fast reader. So I kind of, and my sister was too. So we kind of get up early, just blitz through whatever paces, packets of accelerated Christian education. I learned
Right.
that after the fact that that's what it stood for. And I think that's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
So whatever paces we needed to do, we'd go through, and then there would be a self test to check our knowledge at the end, and then a pace test where we would get our grade. And we would just do whatever we were kind of like assigned and would probably be done by lunch. And then that's really when the real learning commenced, even if it wasn't necessarily academic, spending time with my mom, reading, uh, watching Judge Judy, which honestly is educational. It should be.
Absolutely.
It's I'm a sociologist now, and I probably the TV that I consumed as a kid is part of the reason I was drawn to sociology because people are just so fascinating.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was structured and unstructured, and over time, I think, and this is an experience a lot of people have. It became a little less structured to my memory. In my case, I don't think that was even a bad thing, just because, again, I think the enrichment I got was largely kind of outside of it, but it loomed less large in my life, especially by the time I entered middle school. I was, the paces were just a box to tick, and then I would go on and do
Right.
what I actually wanted to do.
I think about that too of like I remember my mom being very structured the first couple of years and kind of wanting to mimic maybe a more traditional school setting. I had also
Right,
done 2 years of public school, and so I kind of had that like she was like, well, if we kind of keep that, maybe it'll help the transition for him a little bit.
right,
But my sister was not that way. She needed to operate in her own time frame, kind of a deal. But as time went on, we kind of the structure loosened. I think it became less of like, hey,
hmm,
at 8:30 in the morning, you'll be up and dressed and sitting in a seat doing your work. It became more of like, hey, like, yeah, here's your checklist for the day and get that done. And here's your checklist for tomorrow. And
right,
if you want to start working on that, you totally can.
yeah,
So it's not that it became completely like unschooling or just very, nebulous, but it started to have, I think, a little bit more of a like, hey, you have a responsibility to do these things.
hmm,
In a timely manner, which is both like a pro and a con, I think, of homeschooling to some degree. Of like some people
yeah.
really latch on to that like that ownership piece of being their own educator in a lot of ways.
No, I agree. And if I may say, I think that can be one of the strongest benefits of homeschooling. As
Right.
somebody with pretty intense ADHD, sitting down for long periods of time and paying attention by staying still is really difficult for me.
Yeah.
When I ended up, we'll get to public school, but when I ended up there, I had to come up with some pretty funny adaptations to just be able to pay attention. So I think that homeschooling can, really facilitate uh, ideal learning for people like me, for lots of different people. Now, of course, when it's child led to the point of, oh well, he's not interested in reading, so we'll just let him learn to read when he's 13. That can be
That could be a problem.
a little bit of an extreme manifestation of it. But I do think that there is a problem, and for us to, when we're it's no surprise I'm on here because I'm with the Coalition for Responsible Home Education. We believe there should be stronger oversight of homeschooling and more resources for homeschooling families. But when we, work toward improving homeschooling, that is not to say that we don't think that there are aspects of public schooling and conventional schooling that can be changed. It's not a zero sum game. You can kind of work, a rising tide can float all boats. And I certainly learn better like now, like doing learning because I'm a researcher. I'm, always absorbing things. I have to read a lot. I have to, keep up with literature and things like that. It's really nice being at home. I work from home to be able to like move around and, do it on my own schedule. So that is something that I now only looking back realize that did help me for sure. There were,
Yeah.
of course, drawbacks, but it is an immense benefit to be able to kind of have ownership over even just like the physical space where you're learning.
The other question I had for you was like, in moving around quite a bit and experiencing kind of those different homeschool communities, like did community exist in those places? Were you in co-ops? Did you have like friends? Was it super isolating? Like how did that look? Because like I the reason I ask is because like I grew up in a very large homeschool community with hundreds of kids, and so like I think I thought that was normal for a lot of people, and like
Hmm.
and so I had friends, I had access to those people, and so now I'm starting to, as I'm getting to know more alumni, I'm like, oh, okay, I had a very kind of interesting unique experience, but I'm interested in the social aspect for different people.
It kind of varied. For the most part, I would say I felt rather isolated as a child, and for me, it's really difficult to disentangle the homeschooling from the moving because we moved dozens of times to
Right.
different places. It was, again, it was cross continental. It was all across the U.S. Which again, those are there are really a lot of pluses to that kind of experience. But one of the
Right.
kind of cons was that I just, yeah, couldn't really keep up long sustainable relationships. I'm pretty good at, if you kind of throw me in a room, I can make friends and I can adapt pretty quickly, probably because of those experiences. But in terms of keeping, long-term friendships alive, that was something I found really challenging as a child, and felt kind of alienated. Um, we did do, when we lived in Iowa for a little bit, we did do co-ops. That was co-op culture was big there. And I kind of got a taste of that. My parents are kind of renegades. My mom especially is a bit of a contrarian, and that's some of her best kind of qualities come out of that for sure. She was always my memories of her during homeschooling when we were kind of like in churches and co-ops where she would read Harry Potter openly.
Nice.
Make a point. She would run wearing only a sports bra, which the ladies at church thought was just absolutely uncouth. And she kind of attributed it to being Australian, just not getting like American kind of Puritanism, but that's just more who she is. So the co-ops, we were never, never the best fit, I would say. And that's why I think when it came down to it and I was getting a little bit older and I was able to kind of articulate that school felt important, I think it was well received, partially because of, again, we just weren't really meshing with the groups that we kind of were a part of. But yeah, it varied. I know in California there's a pretty big co-op scene. I mean, you were homeschooled
Yeah.
in
I
California, big co-op.
yeah,
Nice.
massive co-op. Yeah, Achieve was huge, and there was Group Solutions, which was another kind of co-op type thing, and then just a lot of like splinter off cells of people who were, a part of that bigger co-op, but then were doing their own independent, only six families or that kind of a thing. And so there
Right.
was just very much a culture of, we help each other and those types of things. But yeah, but there also is that difference of opinion that comes with that, right? Where it's like my parents are okay or teach a certain way, and other parents teach a different way, and so it is very interesting because our education experiences were very individualistic, but also we had the bigger group as well, and so there's yeah. As I've gotten reconnected with a lot of those people, it's very interesting to hear like what they were being taught at home versus what I was being taught at home,
Hmm.
and just the difference that existed there. Like you were saying, like your
Yeah.
mom just openly would read Harry Potter. It's like I have friends that was the case. I
Hmm.
came from a no Harry Potter home, even though like Lord of the
The
Rings and
two
Narnia was
genders
okay. Yeah,
homeschooling.
exactly. Um, and so, yeah, so it's very interesting to kind of start to like dig into some of those things with people of like, why is that, right? And I don't know. I'm also still kind of connected to some of the homeschooling parents, and so I am a lot more vocal about being like, why did you make this decision, and why did you choose
Hmm.
this, and that kind of a thing. And some people don't mind being pressed a little bit, and other people are like, what are we doing? Um, I mean, you kind of hinted at like the transition into public school, but I'm interested. Like, let's unpack that a little bit because you were saying that you went to your parents and you were kind of like, okay, I think maybe it sounds like you were saying traditional school might be the thing, or this isn't really not working for me. So, like, how did that transition kind of come about?
I left out a pretty significant piece, which is funny. My sister and I both do this. We were, when I was in, I guess, starting in technically sixth grade, I didn't think of things in terms of grades until, being in
Yeah.
school. But from about sixth through the start of eighth grade, my family was homeless. And
Okay.
we were just kind of living, we were kind of hopping from home to home with different, my father's in Calvary Chapel,
Hmm.
and was kind of significant figure in the Calvary Chapel scene. So we would just live with different Calvary Chapel folks, and kind of until we got on our feet. And when we ended up getting a rental and were kind of stable for the first time in a bit, that's when the school conversation opened up. So I think it was partially, again, this is why it's so difficult for me to kind of separate the homeschooling from the kind of instability of, the financial instability and kind of the, domestic instability of my childhood. But I think when we finally got a place, I was also, I was a very vocal kid. I was a very assertive kid. I mean, oldest child, socialized as oldest daughter, no, oldest son energy. I just like, was very, once I had something to crusade about, I remember I wanted my parents to get me a rat, like a pet rat, and my mom really didn't want a rat. And
Okay.
so I was just like, I made like a PowerPoint about why rats are good. I put on, it was the middle of summer, and I put on like a ton of layers of clothes, and I just sat outside and I'm like, I'm not leaving until we get a rat. She won that one. And I ultimately, that she won that battle. I ultimately won the war because we did get a rat and it was her favorite pet we ever got. But anyway, so when it came to, the beginning of the school year, eighth grade, I was really lonely.
Hmm.
And we had finally settled, we had a place, and I was like, look, like I really want to try school. And to my mother's immense credit, she didn't have this like, I think with homeschooling, and I understand this really, if this is so many parents sacrifice an immense amount to make homeschooling work, and as a result, really see it as part of who they are.
Right.
And so I could understand, if you've been homeschooling for, 8 years or so, and your kid all of a sudden is like, I need to do something different. I could see why that would sting. But my mother, was open to it. And I enrolled in eighth grade in middle school. My sister was in fifth grade. It was kind of interesting. We're both at the tail ends before jumping up to the next kind of level,
Okay. Yeah.
which had its challenges. This was also the year, so it's eighth grade. Eighth grade sucks for everybody. I don't care,
Yeah.
who you are or what form of schooling you're doing. You're just gonna feel pretty existentially awful in eighth grade. And I was the new kid. I didn't really know how to like interact in like a secular environment super well. So I brought a Bible the first day, and I was just like, I'm gonna like, if somebody's trying to like do something demonic, I can shield myself, kind of thing. And so I had that whole social adjustment piece. the academic adjustment was, I kind of took to that like a fish to water. I was so ready to learn more. But kind of in my home life, my parents were getting divorced. So
Okay.
that was just kind of a perfect storm of so much, so many new things, so many changes, so much kind of turbulence that we actually went back to homeschooling. I got through a little bit of ninth grade, went back to homeschooling for a little bit before my mother remarried and we moved. So, yes, eighth grade is when I entered public school, but it was really 10th grade where that actually became sustainable. The eighth grade experience was significant and, was a huge part of the transition for me, but it was really kind of
Right.
10th grade when I actually stuck through and ended up in a school for more than, you know, 9 months.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes those moments are, yeah, it's like that significant moment of like, sometimes it gives you that confidence of like I could do this. Sometimes it confirms a like no, this isn't for me, like kind of a thing. It sounds
Mm-hmm.
like it to some degree kind of maybe confirmed in you that you were like, okay, no, I can do this. Like this is, like you said, you kind of took to the academics level of it pretty easily, which I think a lot
Yes.
of homeschool kids worry about sometimes of like, I mean, I know headed into college, I was like, I don't know if I'm gonna be able to keep up with everybody. That was my
Right.
biggest concern. And I got to school and I was like, oh no, I can do this. Like I'm thankful my
Mm-hmm.
my mom taught me how to like have a love for learning and how to ask questions
Yes.
appropriately. Because even the things that I was behind in, I was like, okay, I can get caught up. This is not the end of the world
Right.
scenario. And so um I'm a little curious too. I mean, I think it's really cool that your mom also was very open to letting you go back or go into public school. Because I think a lot of parents, like you were saying, kind of hold that like I've sacrificed all this
Mm-hmm.
stuff, I've sacrificed time and energy, and so they really view it almost like a failure if their kid wants to go to
Yeah.
school. And it's really not like I think the parents who hold a little bit more of the like, hey, let's go case by case, year by year, we can kind of assess and see where someone needs to go and how they, because we change, we grow. You said eighth grade, we're changing drastically. You were like,
Mm-hmm.
it's miserable for everybody. Yes, I remember eighth grade, and I remember being like, I hate myself, and I I hate everybody around me, and it just yeah, puberty sucks, and it's just like the world is breaking all around you. And but it's really cool that your mom was willing to kind of say, okay, no, like let's give my kids the opportunity to go experience it
Mm-hmm.
and see. So then when it came back to 10th grade, obviously, like you said, ninth went back to homeschooling just because of, life reasons and things like that. But when it came to
Mm-hmm.
10th grade and going back, like, was that again kind of you dictating, like, hey, I think I want to go back, I want to do this, and, you know,
Yeah.
make that more
It,
of a
it
permanent thing?
it was. Yeah. Which again, I really now kind of understanding, I don't have kids of my own yet, but I've been in a mentor role and like even in that role, which is not the same as a parent, just like, you really invest in what you want for somebody. And when somebody chooses differently, it really does kind of, it can hurt. And so just now understanding what the stakes were for my mother, I'm so thankful that it became a conversation again. We were moving. When she remarried, her husband was in Charleston, South Carolina. They met online dated, and then we moved to all the way across the country. And during the moving process, it became a conversation of, do you want to keep homeschooling? Do you want to try school? And I decided I wanted to try again. I mean, at this point, 10th grade is when you do start thinking, if you're college bound or thinking of getting, pursuing higher education, 10th grade, you do kind of have to start having those conversations. And I think I just kind of sensed that I'd need some support in doing that.
Yeah.
So and also it was just kind of turning a new leaf. This was a brand new place. I'd lived a lot of places, but I hadn't lived in South Carolina yet. So I
Yeah.
was able to kind of start fresh, turn a new leaf, and just kind of figure out who the hell I was and what I wanted. And I thought that doing that in school made sense. And my sister also, my sister's a writer. She's a creative, and there was a magnet school in the area that had a creative writing program, and that worked really well for her. So
Yeah.
both decided let's go ahead and give school the old college, the old high school try,
Right.
um, and uh, and yeah, enrolled in 10th grade at the beginning of.
Okay. And you'd mentioned that like the academic side wasn't maybe like the biggest struggle. It definitely, I'm sure school in general can just be tough sometimes, but like,
Mm-hmm.
um, but it doesn't seem like that was necessarily like oh, I'm feeling, eons behind in a lot of my subjects. But you mentioned that like the socialization aspect was a little bit trickier. Once you
Yeah.
settled in South Carolina, did it become easier because you had a little bit more security in the home life of like, hey, we're not moving as much, like I can maybe put down roots a little bit more, or was that maybe a later thing where you started to kind of break into, I don't know, more of a traditional socialization, I guess?
I think traditional socialization really, I'm going to be honest, I felt finally like I'd gotten a handle on that in grad school. So
Okay.
it was a long, long process. It was definitely the start of it, though. In South Carolina, I did feel like I wanted to embed myself. I stayed in the same high school. We did move, and there was some additional kind of chaos, but I did stay in the same high school, which was great. Really
Okay.
good for me to be somewhere for 3 years. I don't think we'd lived anywhere for 3 years at that point. So that
Right.
stability was a huge boon for me. Academically, yeah, I definitely took to it, minus a couple of things. I mean, math, I think this is an experience that a lot of us share, to the extent that there is a universal homeschool experience. I don't really think there is, but the math being a challenge is something that I felt. I when I disenrolled from ninth grade, I didn't finish geometry, so I had to retake it,
Okay.
which wasn't a big deal. So I doubled up on math and ended up being okay, but I had a little bit of catch up to do. And when I
Yeah.
originally enrolled in eighth grade from homeschool, I had to take remedial. It wasn't remedial, but I had to kind of break up algebra into two pieces, and I had to take a summer class. So there was a little bit of an adjustment there, but overall, fine. The sitting still piece was a theme throughout the
Yeah.
3 years of high school. My chemistry teacher, God bless her, she was just like, oh my gosh, like you're doing really really well in this class. You clearly respect me. I know it's not coming from you not being, you know, you trying to just like goof off, but like you are moving constantly. Like, what can I do? And I was just like, just let me play 2048. 20. You remember 2048, the iPhone game?
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
match the tiles and they add up. I was like, can you just let me play 2048 when I'm listening to you? It seems like I'm not, but I promise you, moving my hands is going to help me just kind of stay still. And she was like, okay, if you insist. And it actually did work. So I was allowed to kind of have my phone. Definitely could have found a better option than me playing a game on my phone. But
Right.
we work with what we have.
Yeah.
And
I think that's the crazy. I grew up in a house with ADHD. With a my sister has ADHD, and it was crazy because like I'm neurotypical. I could sit for a while and just, it's not a problem to me. I can read, I can, and it's just be
yeah.
there and be completely quote unquote present, I guess. And she just
Hmm.
could not do it. And so,
Yeah.
we had a trampoline, little trampoline in the house. She had, she would knit. She had always had to do something with her hands in order to like maintain it. And it was just so interesting to me because like I would try it. Like, there was a point where I would like crochet or knit or whatever, and like I could not retain any information. Like if my mom was reading a textbook to
Wow.
us and I was doing that, I couldn't tell you anything that we talked about. My sister, on the other hand, it was like photographic memory. She was like, "Yeah, we did this and this and
Hmm.
this and blah blah blah." But if I just sat there and listened, and so it definitely taught me, I think, kind of that like patience it sometimes takes with people and trying to understand that it's like, even to this day, it's like I go out with people or whatever and somebody's, fidgeting or being weird, and my the natural instinct is to say, oh, they're bored with what I'm saying, or they're, or
Yeah.
they're not listening. And it's like I really sometimes I go, no, 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 that's just, they have to do what they have to do. It's their coping
Yes.
mechanism, it's their whatever, it's their thing, in order to like actually like maintain, you know, um, some focus on what it is. And so that's cool that your teacher was willing to like work with you to be like, you're a good kid. You've got this stuff down, but it's just, yeah, we got to figure out the classroom setting of like you're being a distraction or whatever. So,
Right. And having, kind of flashing forward, having had the privilege of being able to teach, I taught the one of the a workshop for one of the master's courses during my PhD, and I've had some other teaching experiences. Being able to being on the other side of it and seeing how much you really do need to accommodate each individual learner as best you can. It's really exciting. It's kind of like I enjoy puzzles, problem solving, and it's kind of teaching is just a huge exercise of that because every single kid is going to need something different, and the best schools, whether they be homeschools, whether they be public, private schools, charter schools, Montessori, whatever, are schools where kids are able to uh, learn in an individuated way, as difficult as that can be.
yeah.
But yeah, no, I was really lucky. I credit my teachers with so much. I've always been a nerd. I've always been kind of like a independent learner. I've always been the things that I tend to be interested in. Again, with ADHD, you think about like hyper focus and things that you kind of get really, get into rabbit holes on. For me, it was always broadly academic, and so I was able to kind of take that laser and just point it toward school,
Hmm.
which really assisted me. And that isn't now my focuses are very different, and people have and when kids don't have they happen to have something that that isn't as academic as their focus, that doesn't mean that they're any less intelligent. I just happen to be really interested in nerdy school stuff, so that plus teachers supporting me
Yep.
really enabled me to thrive, and to do really well and
Yeah.
conventionally in school.
Yeah. No, it was funny. I was talking to Tess, and Tess was saying how they're like, Jonah's really smart. And I was like, okay, okay. And she was saying how she's like, but Jonah doesn't like present as a super arrogant smart person. And I was like, okay, I know that feeling. I have a cousin who um he's like an astrologist or something like that, and I mean, this guy is genius. He looks at the stars, he's named planets, like he's really smart when it comes to the galaxy, kind of a deal. But he presents himself in a very just like down to earth, very similar nature as you do, of just one of us. But you obviously know what you're talking about, and you are very intelligent. It's very clear, but not in an arrogant way. So,
I
um,
appreciate that. And I mean, it's hard for me to even accept that as, a compliment, partially because one really formative experience for me was when I was interviewing for a scholarship for undergrad, at Duke, where I actually ended up going. And they had a speaker come and give a talk, to kind of give a sample of what it looks like to go to a college lecture. And the lecturer was talking about multiple forms of intelligence and Gardner's multiple forms of intelligence, and how we really have a very narrow and kind of suffocating small view of what it means to be smart. And he was talking about dogs and how immensely intelligent dogs are, and it all depends on the scale. And so for me, yes, it just happens to be that my some of the things that I'm adept at are, seen as like they're school related. They're related to different, kind of forms of thinking that we
yeah,
kind of recognize as, oh yeah, you're a geek, you're a nerd, whatever. But it's the more that I think about it, I mean, social intelligence, we talk about EQ, emotional intelligence, but that's real. That is
yeah,
something that, is so essential to life. And I think with homeschooling, when we think about when it doesn't go as well, when we don't have parents like my mother, like, people in your community, that side can go really underdeveloped and undernourished, not for any fault of the person who, not for any fault of the child, but because that's something that's learned. And,
right.
I, I just think about that a lot, how if you don't have the multiple forms of intelligence. If you don't, if you're not working on your social skills, your emotional skills, like physical skills too. I'm horrible at that, by the way. I am like, I don't know how to, I have no spatial reasoning. I need a map to get me from like the shopping center to my car.
Okay.
Like, we're
Yeah.
all my kind of like pet theories. We're all equal. Everybody has the same amount of talent.
Mhm.
This is my like conspiracy theory about the world. Everybody has the exact same, like it all evens out. We just have it in different kind of amounts depending on kind of the,
Interesting.
which intelligence we have. So I think what I uh, have in books, I lack in directions.
Well, you just, you got to find those people. This is where it takes the village, right? You got to find those people who have those skills,
Exactly.
right?
Nobody has
So,
all of them. Nobody has enough fully on their own, I don't
right.
think.
Right. No, yeah, I kind of agree with that. I'm latching onto your conspiracy theory a little bit. I think that's pretty accurate. Let's talk about college a little bit. And you mentioned Duke and for undergrad. So like, did you go directly high school? Did you do the traditional path of like high school directly into college, or did you take a break in there, or how was that kind of experience? I'm assuming it was maybe
Mhm.
a little easier. Not, I don't want to say easier to get into college, but because you had gone to a public high school, I think there probably was a little less worry of like the home, for me, I homeschooled all the way through high school. So there was a little bit of that worry of like the
Right.
transcripts
The
matching, being
legibility of
able,
what you
right.
learn. Yeah, exactly. No,
No.
public school helps that. And I will say, the school I went to is pretty under resourced. It was a Title I school. And they didn't have a lot of people go on to, the kinds of, like private selected institutions. And so they didn't really have a lot of resources on hand at the beginning, but they worked with me, and that was it's what you're saying about things taking a village. It was a learning process for us all. I remember Duke required subject tests, SAT subject tests, which I knew nothing about actually until what was it? It's about a week before the final tests were on offer for me to submit with my application, and I was like, oh no, I have to like study, cram for two of these to actually make an application to the school. And I ended up being able to do it because the subjects are subjects you've already learned and all that. But my school, I'm saying this because the school didn't necessarily have all of the resources. I think about I've worked with and know people who went to really elite high schools, like private high schools, and what they have is just it's bonkers to me. But even so, I can acknowledge being in public school, even when not everyone was sure what we were doing when we were going through the application process, was immensely more. It was immensely more of a smooth process than it would have been if I were homeschooling. So I did go straight through, and I'll just spoiler alert, I went all the way straight through my PhD, which I do not recommend to those listening at home. Again, everybody's different. Some people that might be the right course of action. I think that bringing life to a graduate program, to a PhD, to a professional program like med school, law school, can be really helpful. Again, depends on the person. For me, it would have been. I was the youngest person by far in my PhD cohort.
Okay.
I just it seeing how people who brought a lot. I researched. I'm an education researcher, and I studied education. And a lot of the other people in my program came to the program with kind of lived practical experience in teaching and being teachers and being educators and being education administrators and all of these kinds of things, and just seeing what they kind of how they could blend their research with practice and experience, that would have been useful. But anyway,
Yeah.
yeah, I went straight to college, and that was a pretty big transition.
Okay.
The first year of college was because that was the first year I was away from my mother in particular,
Yeah.
and I uh, I was a little bit shell shocked, as a lot of kids are. But I think the homeschool, having become so close with my mother and sister through homeschooling, I think that kind of initial separation was a lot more uh, daunting than it would have been if I had not been homeschooled for most of my young life.
Yeah, I remember feeling that shell shock too, because yeah, I I will say I credit my mom with the fact that she knew it was going to be difficult for her too, and so she was like,
Mm-hmm.
"Hey, here's the deal. I'm gonna call. Can I call you once a week?" That was kind of. I moved across the country, so I grew up in
Mm-hmm.
California. I moved to Illinois for college. She was like, "Can I just call you once a week, and it can just be Saturdays or Sundays or whatever?" And I was like, "Yeah." And so we'd talk for like an hour on and just catch up on our weeks and whatever. But I thank her so much for that because she started to learn we got to build those boundaries a little bit of like
Yeah.
you're launching and you're doing your life and like I have to go find what's next for my life and those kinds of things. And but yeah, as that homeschool bond really is it can solidify those relationships with your parent, with your siblings, and it makes it very difficult when you
Mm-hmm.
do get on your own because like that built-in support system just kind of isn't. It's not that it's not there, but it's not there 24/7 like it has been for the last decade of your life pretty much or longer. And so yeah, that can be definitely a little bit of a
It was a lot,
shock.
and we didn't. Our process wasn't as smooth as a transition
Yeah.
as you and your mom on both of our ends. I mean, I think for me, I just like my mother was, and you know, uh, for good reason, was my sounding board,
Yeah.
and I just couldn't. I needed to learn to think independently, um, and she likewise needed to find herself outside of her kids, and that
Right.
was really hard. In addition to just, I mean, living on your own for the first time, I remember like using the having to do laundry and not putting like soap in there. Just like and these are
Yeah.
things that kids who are publicly schooled or traditionally schooled also kind of face. But I was just like, I really had a lot on the like logistical, practical, just like executive functioning part of life to
Mhm.
learn that college was a real wake up call.
No, I remember teaching someone how to put gas in their car. And I was like, how do you not know how to do this? And
Well, were
they're
they from
like,
New Jersey?
no, they were from Illinois. Their dad just was really nice guy. He still is. I met the guy. He's a really nice guy, and he would get up on Saturday mornings and he would take every one of their cars and go fill it with gas for the week. And that was just he just thought it was just a nice gesture, right? It was the nice thing that he did for his family
Yeah.
every week. And but as a result, like no one in his family knew how to pump gas. And so, it's just hilarious. We're in college and he's like, my car's running out of gas. I don't know what to do. And we're like, we'll go to the gas station. He's like, what am I supposed to do? And so we like walked him through that process. But yeah, similar, like I relate to like, yeah, you have to figure out those things that you're like, I've never had to think about this before. Like
Right.
my mom is taking care of, my dad's taking care of it, my, whoever, it's just been dealt with for me. And so yeah, learning those, it's like it's a stretch. And then not to mention also like the parts of like kind of also building your routine of like, okay, I'm hungry, I need to eat, or
Hmm.
there's like structure to those types of things. And nobody is calling me down for dinner. It's either I go
Yes.
now or it's over. So I something I'm interested in too. So I bring this up quite a bit, but like when I got to college, I did not want anyone to know that I had been a homeschool kid. And so I
Hmm.
just always said that I was private schooled. You know, you have a little bit of an out because you were in public high school,
I
but like,
exactly.
did you want to hide your homeschoolness as you kind of entered into adulthood, or is that something that you're like, no, this is just a part of who I am?
I think I wanted to hide it so comprehensively that I didn't even realize I was hiding it. It was
Yeah.
subconscious. And you're right, I had the out. I was able to say, yeah, I graduated from this high school. I went to this school. There were, I had a cover
Yeah.
alibi or something.
Yeah.
And I kept that up for a really, really long time. Um, because yeah, people, uh, for better or for worse, have a lot of, they make a lot of assumptions around homeschooling. Some of them are funny and benign. Some of them are less so. And some of them have weight to them. I think the social awkwardness, the assumption that, you're, what's the main character from Mean Girls? You're Lindsay Lohan's character is homeschooled and doesn't like
Yeah. 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 They're
that
like, you're a
kind of
weirdo.
you're
Yeah.
a weirdo. Yeah, it's like and that kind of stereotype is still loud when I talk to. I
Yeah.
obviously am talking about homeschooling a lot in my life now, and when I'm telling people about what I do for the first time, they're always like, "Oh, homeschool." Um, you know, ooh, yeah. People who are homeschooled, you know, uh,
Yeah.
they're sheltered freakazoids basically, and not always, and I think people have empathy and they can quickly like correct themselves, but I think that initial assumption is there.
Yeah.
And for me, I wanted to prove myself. I wanted to kind of exist on I wanted to do things on my own merit, basically. And I
Yeah.
wanted to just be kind of judged as me, and, not with this kind of baggage, especially socially. Because academically, it's interesting in spaces like, Duke, and I ended up, you know, getting a fancy scholarship and going to Oxford. And when you have something to differentiate yourself, you can actually almost like turn that into like a commodity or like a selling point. It's like, ooh, I'm
Okay.
different.
Yeah.
I have this story that, is a little bit alt, off kilter, whatever. And you can kind of use that to market yourself. And not that I explicitly tried to market myself, but you are kind of encouraged to do that. You're trying, kind of create a narrative of your life. And so weirdly, in terms of progressing on and like getting opportunities, mentioning that I had this kind of strange educational experience worked, but in everyday life, in classes, in social situations with peers, absolutely, I just didn't even touch it. Even when I did end up writing about it for scholarship applications or whatever, it was almost like I had split myself. I'm like, okay, there's this
Right.
piece. This is my resume. This is like me on paper, and then but me in the world, no, that's not who I am, because I was insecure. I was insecure, especially
Yeah.
about just being awkward and an alien and not making sense.
Yeah.
So I did disidentify with homeschooling pretty dramatically, and I'm really interested. I hope to research this at some point, when it makes sense, just how people, what their different relationships to their homeschool experience uh, is, because I don't think there's one single story there, but I do think there's a really big trend of people kind of like repressing it when they feel
Yeah.
that it will be a disadvantage.
Yeah. Well, like you said, it's like kind of that splitting of yourself of like, because I also like I included that in my admissions
Yeah.
letters and stuff because I was like, it is that selling point of like, this is a little different. I did things a little different, and like people may view this as a challenge, so I've overcome that, and 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 I have the grades to back it up that I can do. Uh, college level work kind of a deal, and
Right.
and so I was like, okay, yeah, I'm going to use this. But then I got there and I didn't want any of the peers. I didn't even want professors to really know. Some of them could sniff it out. But like, I didn't want anyone else to know that that was the case. But I was fine with admissions knowing because I was like, well, they're going to read it and then that's it. Like, it's just staying in their office kind of a deal. And so to your point of like being able to split those two and say, you know, yeah, this is my behind the scenes take advantage of the system version of myself, and then here's my
Mm-hmm.
actual like public facing persona. We're very different in a lot of ways. I'm curious too because you mentioned earlier like kind of you know, socialization not really like feeling like you had like a firm grasp until you were in your PhD program. And so like was there like a moment or an instance that kind of like solidified it of you're like, okay, like I think I have got this down now of like I know how to socialize with people and I'm building stronger friendships than maybe I had experienced before because like you said early on, you moved around so much as a kid, and so having those long lasting friendships is difficult. I think
Yeah.
it's difficult in general, but yeah, especially when you're like moving around every year or less than a year, it's very tricky to put down roots. So was there a moment then in grad school that you were like, okay, like I think I've got this now?
Similar to eighth grade, I think grad school, and not only just starting a new program, but one that was across the Atlantic Ocean, was kind of an opportunity for reinvention that
Right.
I really saw as an opportunity, not for a blank slate. I'm always, part of me is just because I moved a lot, I'm very tempted to sometimes just, scrap things and start over. And just,
Right.
if you look at my Google Drive, if you look at my computer, if you look like journals, I will just like take things out, then start over. And I'm trying to correct that impulse. So it wasn't entirely trying to like fully reinvent myself, but it was an opportunity again to kind of uh, differentiate and start a new phase of adulthood in a different place with different people. I think it can kind of be crystallized into moments because for me, feeling socially comfortable is absolutely inseparable from coming out.
Exactly.
And in undergrad, I between freshman and sophomore year, I realized I was queer. And at Duke at the time, Duke now seems like the queer community there is thriving, and I love that. Happy Pride. But you know, at the time, that was 2014, 2015.
Okay.
It actually like wasn't the easiest thing, and so
Yeah.
coming out, I wasn't able to. At least I kind of didn't feel like, oh, I'm coming out and I'm going to have like a community around this. It felt like another kind of demerit almost. Like we got
Right.
homeschool and now we had this. And at that point, it was just coming out as queer and not trans. And in grad school, I realized we had like an LGBT group chat like before for my cohort before we even got to Oxford, and there were so many people in it, and I was like, okay, wait, so this community is one where I can just kind of like be more open about this and not be on the defensive about it. What I tend to do is, I have a pretty self-deprecating humor. I'll just something that I perceive as like a weakness or something that people might make fun of. I get really in front of it and I make it a bit. And that was kind of my strategy for being queer, being homeschooled, whatever. I still partially do that to this day, to be honest. But in grad school, I didn't feel the need to do that. I felt, oh, okay, I can actually be other things in addition to being
Right.
these things. So I think that was really critical. And then it was in grad school that I came out as trans, and that was a whole winding journey with some really. It was not fully linear, but now I'm in a good spot with it. But the fact that that started there enabled
Yeah.
me to just kind of actually fully exist in my body. I've always been fine in my head. I'm kind of a brain in a vat. At least I used to perceive myself as I'm a brain in a vat.
Okay.
And actually realizing, oh, maybe the reason I'm disembodied is because I don't really like my physical form.
Right.
That was helpful in realizing, oh yeah, it's actually good to be a human who lives in the world, who has
Yeah.
somatic experiences in addition to
Yeah.
just thinking.
There's something really cool about like when you finally kind of find yourself and
Yes.
you can like fully say to the world, okay, this is who I am, but also like those identifying markers of yourself, you start to like own them, because as soon as you are confident in yourself and you feel comfortable in your own skin, and you have the words to express that, that is a confidence that then kind of
Yes.
allows you to build friendships, relationships, like all of those other pieces start to, I feel like, fall into place. And while I can't like relate to, the coming outness of
Hmm.
your story, like I can relate to that, like finding your voice side of things, where it's
Yeah.
like finally I feel like this is who I am. This is my person. This is, I'm in touch with who I am. I'm comfortable with who I am. I'm not going to apologize for that. And like, it gives you that confidence to then be like, okay, yeah, like I can go make friends now, and I'm never going to have to apologize for who I am. I'm not, and they're going to get me for who I am because I'm confident in knowing who I am. And I think
Yes.
that's a big part of also the socialization aspect of like when you have parts of yourself that are hidden away, or you're just less confident in, or you don't really know who you are in those aspects. It's really easy to like make friends with people who like are not totally in alignment with that.
Hmm.
um and you don't always realize it, but you're like, there's always something just kind of like hindering this friendship or this relationship or whatever. And so, but like I was saying, as you get more confident in who you are and your identity, it's like all of a sudden you're like, yeah, well, they're either gonna take me for who I am or they can kick rocks,
Yeah,
kind of a deal.
exactly. No, and for all the struggles that come along with being queer, one kind of advantage is that you have this built-in framework coming out for, finding your
Yeah.
voice, identifying who you are, and it's a template, it's a pattern. I found that in different, other aspects of me that aren't around like identity coming out as a really useful way of thinking about, oh, there's something that I'm repressing. Why is that?
Yeah.
You kind of have like tools for introspection there that make it a little bit easier. I think after I came out with the capital C, there are all these other little, lowercase c coming out that I think we do for the rest of our lives, whether we're queer or
Yeah.
not.
Yeah.
And no, it's such a huge having that confidence. I will say, turning 30, I turned 30 this year. It was almost like a switch flip. I was just like, I don't care anymore. Like,
Yeah.
I just I mean, I do care obviously about my impact, and I don't want to harm others with how I am and things like that. But just the like being able to just like, this is who I am, take it or leave it. Entering the third decade was really big for me there. So it does take time, even if you have all the tools. I think it's just something that you have to like, it slow cooks, it simmers. You can't just kind of, you know, to torture the metaphor, just blitz it in the air fryer of life. That's awful.
Right. I get what you mean. No, I
Yeah.
see what you mean. I'm kind of the same way. I'm turning 30 this year, and I'm at a point in my life like I jokingly say all the time, I'm like, fuck it. They're gonna either like it or not like it, and that's their problem. That's not my
and
problem,
that's and that's their problem. And
so
again, of course, if you're, you remain open to feedback if anything is, negatively impacting others. But as far as just being
absolutely.
you and
Yeah.
having your own interests and yeah, just becoming a full human, uh, that is, it's really interesting how there's this kind of like, it is a flashpoint. I feel like I think
Hmm.
with a new decade. I mean, I remember turning 20. I remember turning 25. That was a big one for me.
Yeah.
24 was really existential. And then the time 25 hit, I was like, oh, wow, I've done all this thinking and now I'm here. What the hell? That's actually when I ended up coming out as trans. So, I think these like milestones are helpful for, speeding along the process, but ultimately now we just you have to live it. And I hate that. I love, I don't know. I'm kind of part of the, I guess, microwave short form content generation of I just want results. Like give me
Yeah.
results. And this is the kind of thing where you have to sit it out and be
Yeah.
patient.
Yeah. But I think that's the beautiful part of life sometimes is like the just existing in it and growing with it and learning more about yourself. Every day I'm like thankful, I learn a little bit more about myself and a little bit more of what I'm comfortable with and things like that. And I think that that's like it's one of the greatest parts of my life is like the learning aspect of just who I am as a person because, I think for so long, you and I both come from the religious background, the homeschool background.
Mm-hmm.
Like a lot of times in those environments, a lot of things get put on you as far as the labels go, and as far as like who you're going to
Mm-hmm.
be. There's a structure, and this is who you are, and this is what your the expectations are, and those types of things. And then yeah, I think 25ish is kind of a a good age where sometimes a lot of that goes out the window where it's just like no, like none of that, like that holds no bearing over me. I get to be who I want to be. At least for me, that was big. Where I started to be like no, 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 no. What is it that you want? What is it that
Right.
your body is telling you and those types of things. And so
Yeah.
again, it comes to that confidence of starting to really create that self identity and to your point of like, yeah, I don't want to hurt people, and I want to self examine, but I also want to accept what is coming out of me, and like what is the true expression of who Jacob is, it's like
Yeah.
he's a very different guy than he was when he's 16.
Mm-hmm. And
So
then you've really made it when you can look at the 16-year-old you and have a lot of compassion and maybe a
yes,
little bit of cringe, but not so much that you kind of disidentify from that or try to separate
right,
yourself from that version of you because it's all
right,
you. And
Yeah.
it's all, I don't know, I think it's really, uh, I've been thinking, I've been on a genealogy kick recently. I've been
Okay.
doing like genealogical research for my family, and it's, oh gosh, we've got some real skeletons in many closets. Also, a lot of
Yeah.
closeted people, from my understanding. Not going to say anything. It seems closets are a theme.
Yeah.
But it's thinking about where you come from, and like being able to contextualize yourself during different phases of your development in life, and feel a lot of appreciation for yourself. That is something that I feel like is a mark of maturity that I'm only starting to get to now. That no, I was 14-year-old me could have made some different choices, especially wardrobe wise. But like I'm still like I it's a self acceptance thing that is definitely lifelong.
Yeah.
But it's nice to get some glimpses of it.
Yeah. For sure. I want to get into a little bit of like what you do now and your
Yeah.
involvement with CRHE and the research and those types of things because you know uh I mean you obviously you went to school to be a researcher and to
Mhm.
to do research. How many times am I going to say research in this but like what how did you get tied to CRHE? How did you find them, originally?
I didn't initially set out to research homeschooling. Again,
Right.
that kind of separating, distancing myself from homeschooling, kind of that impulse definitely was still there in
Yeah.
grad school. And my dissertation was on higher education access in the UK, specifically at Oxford and Cambridge, and
Okay.
looking at that, looking at that as a lens for thinking about institutional change, how people understand what how much agency they have in institutions, yada yada yada. That's a whole thing. It's online. 10 people have read it, and I'm grateful for all 10 of them. And that's fine. It's not my greatest work. But uh, I moved. I finished my data collection, which was in the UK, and was able to finish the actual writing up process remotely. And so I moved back to the States. And when I did, that opened up, you know, uh, a line of thinking for me. I was just like, I really haven't thought about the homeschool thing. I'm obviously incredibly invested in education. I'm studying education.
Yeah.
I taught. I feel like my career is somewhere in this world, but I'm leaving out. It's kind of the elephant in the room. I'm leaving out what probably motivated me to have this kind of drive in the first place. And I remember when I was back, it was September of 2021. I Googled like homeschool, like reform or something. I remember that I was homeschooled in mainly California when I was in the US, a little bit in Iowa, kind of smattering of other things, but California was my main kind of anchor for like my touchstone for homeschooling in the US. And I just remember how unregulated I mean,
Yeah,
we
you
had a
one
lady
week to
from,
file a piece of paper and
yeah.
then like that's it. You don't have to do anything else.
And I don't remember, I'm trying to actually reconstruct like what option we were doing, because we did submit some paperwork. It might have been through the church as an umbrella school or something like that.
Okay.
But I remember just this lady from church coming and taking the paces and clipping out the Bible verses and being like, here you go. We're just going to submit this. And I just remember, this is a little, again, I ended up fine, but it seems like there isn't all that much of a safety net here. And
Yeah.
so, with that very little bit of knowledge, I just kind of Googled and I found CRHE. And at the time, I mean, we were all volunteer run until very recently in our history. It was a
Okay.
really small shop of really passionate people who also had full time jobs and lives. And I just reached out. Apparently, there was like a moratorium on volunteers at the time, just because there was like limited capacity, and I was just a little pushy, like just like I'm happy to wait, but I'm here. I know there's a big kind of research component to what you all do. I'm a researcher. I would love to get involved, and they did end up making an exception. which I really appreciate. And I got involved doing kind of just volunteer research things, just kind of helping out with existing projects, and gradually just kind of, I wouldn't say worked my way up, but I worked my way in, just kind of got, involved in the community, learned a lot more about, because again, as kind of touched on earlier, my family were, there's a kind of a countercultural streak. And so co-ops never really worked. We definitely saw ourselves as homeschoolers, but not in we were not like the other homeschoolers almost, which is such a weird thing to
You know, it's
say.
funny you
But
say that, but I feel like that's what a lot of homeschool families say is like, we're not like
yeah,
the other homeschoolers, but you kind of are. It's just that everyone wants homeschooling to be very like individualized, and which it is, but it's just an interesting thing where I hear that a lot of people being like, yeah, but our homeschool experience was very different. And I'm like, yeah, no.
yeah, no, there are pretty powerful trends. Again, I think that
Yeah.
there's no homeschooling is not a monolith, especially these days, and
Right.
I'm sure we'll touch on that on the research side. But it's we were like other homeschool kids in a lot of ways, and so I yeah became I actually I learned a lot about the history of homeschooling in the U.S., which is fascinating. I learned about the research space and just how homeschooling research has just absolutely been dominated by the anti-regulation lobby, and to an
Mhm.
astounding degree, to the point where I can count on one hand. It's growing, fortunately, but really still one hand. Uh, the number of studies that are really that center alumni experience,
Yeah.
and that just seemed to be an immense gap. And being in social science, we do definitely. It took a while, but now it's kind of considered a best practice or standard practice to really think about people's lived experience. The communities who are impacted by research, that they should have a say in the research process. And and homeschooling, it just that did not in any way uh, correspond to that at all. It was just completely, it was universally homeschooling is better than all other modes of education. Kids perform X percentile points higher when they're homeschooled when not. And it was just, that was it. At least from kind of, the peer reviewed, especially the quantitative research. And I can't handle that. I'm kind of stubborn when I kind of latch
Right.
onto something. I'm just like, this is really wrong, and doesn't capture. Obviously, there's just such a disconnect between what the research is speaking to, which, by the way, are real experiences. It's what I'm saying. Everything I'm saying can also coexist with homeschooling. Can be an incredible option that can facilitate
Right.
immense academic success. I am somebody who is very much in that camp. I've seen it these days. More and more people homeschool for very compelling reasons, and that is often the right choice for a child. So that it can all coexist, though, with negative experiences that people intuitively pick up on. Again, when I'm just talking to somebody who doesn't really know a lot, they automatically have that assumption that, oh, there's maybe a little bit of a lack of socialization, there's maybe some sheltering that's going on. And the fact that we can't, as a research community, acknowledge that and explore that, that really bothered me. And then, of course, there's the policy, which, I mean, how much time do we have? It's just,
Yeah.
people, it's one of those kind of niche, although I don't think it's as much of a niche anymore. I think homeschooling has exploded. I think not only in terms of growth, but also just people's awareness of it. But
Yeah.
at least back when I started, right at the kind of, mid pandemic, when homeschooling was having this transformative moment, people just didn't really know. And people don't know how unregulated it is. Like,
Yeah.
it's one of those things where, you learn. I remember watching this documentary on, I don't remember the name of it, but there was a doctor who he was an IVF, he did IVF, and he illegally used his genetic material
Oh,
to create hundreds of
yeah.
people.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Exactly.
then they interviewed people kind of akin to somebody like me or Tess, people who work on policy in the space, and they were just basically, there weren't any regulations or any safeguards. And I was like, oh my gosh, I've never thought of this, because I hadn't had any, personal experience with, that side of medicine. and that's how I kind of see homeschooling. It's just people who don't have experience with it don't think, oh, I wonder that's regulated, right? Like surely
Yeah.
like there's some mechanism in place in every state that makes sure that kids are actually learning something. But no. And just how that the fact that the policy is where it is, combined with the research being where it is, I mean, there's certainly a really close relationship between those things that inspired me to really dedicate my work to kind of resolving these problems. And that's why it's been almost 5 years now, and I'm really I've only become more invested over time.
No, it's really cool because that was something that like when I found the coalition, I was like kind of searching for kind of something similar of like I wanted to understand like homeschool law and things like that. I had just found out that like I was always under the assumption that like my parents had submitted way more paperwork every year of like
Mm-hmm.
to the state. And so, I interviewed my mom and she was like, yeah, no, we signed a piece of paper and shipped it off and that was that. And we didn't have to do anything else. The most regulated thing I did was when I got to the SATs and took the SATs. And I was like, sitting
Yeah.
there kind of mind blown, like not sure what to say. And so I was like, I think something needs to change here. Well, is anybody actually making change? Because I grew up in an environment where HSLDA was very common and they were very pro homeschool parent rights. And
Mm-hmm.
the least government intervention is like the best. And I was like, but I don't necessarily think that's true. I don't think the government has a role. I don't think the government's job is to dictate everything that happens in a homeschool environment, but I do think that the government can
Mm-hmm.
have some role in at least ensuring that kids are safe in these types of environments. And so I was like looking, like you, I was looking for that thing of like, is
Right.
anybody actually doing anything with this? And I found CRHE, and I was like, okay, cool. And then as I started to dig into it, I was like, the great part about what you guys have is also the research side, which is obviously a lot of what you've done. And so seeing actual statistics of like this is happening and also the way that you guys interact with alumni and ask us questions. And I felt like that was a big part of the missing piece because all the research that I had read from other studies centered a lot around the homeschool parent and their experiences,
Mm-hmm.
you know, which can be valid. It can be important information, but it's
Absolutely.
not the lived experience of actually being the educated person. And so I guess the question here, as I've
Mm-hmm.
rambled, is like what exactly, I know you've done a lot of research for CRHE, but like, is there any that stand out as being super significant or that people should check out? And I'm going to make sure like they're linked below, but what pieces, if people want to get like an understanding of maybe what it is that you're doing for them, is there any that are very like, this is the one you should check out?
Yeah. Well, currently we're collecting data for a first of its kind survey of alumni experiences, their kind of self perception of their academic life and also their social adjustment. Um, by the time I think this goes live, that the data collection may be closed, but that's something I can link. That study is going to be, I think, really a necessary corrective for some of these, again, big studies that seem to just show sunshine and rainbows all the time. Not that we won't see sunshine and rainbows. I think we actually will. It's just there's variation. It's just, and when there is variation, what we as researchers want to ask is, well, what accounts for this? When homeschooling works, what about it works? And when it doesn't work, what doesn't work? And for us, that we certainly make room for how it does work. And I mean, I hope parts of this kind of interview even can speak to that. There's aspects of the way that I think, the way that I learn that have been tremendously useful to me that came out of homeschooling. So there's that study. My uh, colleague and I recently published a paper on sex ed,
Okay.
sexual and reproductive health, and sex ed and sexual behavior outcomes among homeschool alumni, specifically religiously educated homeschool alumni. And that just went out. That's something we can link. It's open access, so anybody can read it. It can get dense at times because it's an academic article, but I think the data really um, tell, I always joke with this one. This study finds exactly what you think it would probably find. I mean, there's just, and it's not representative. It's not, I'm not making a proclamation about all homeschooling everywhere, but we did find people who were, at least in our sample, people who were religiously homeschooled, didn't really have adequate sex ed and access to sexual reproductive health resources, which is just something that is real. And when we consider the fact that it's only, I believe it's only 11 states that require health to be one of the subjects taught in a homeschool. And there's only one of those states, Washington, that requires it to be comprehensive health, comprehensive sex ed. So even in the ones where it's required, you can just do abstinence only and you're fine.
Right.
So, it's an uphill battle, and that's not, we don't want to just lay that issue at the feet of homeschooling. I mean, I think that there's a much bigger problem around, sexual health and sex ed, and in public and private schools as well. But there's that study. We have on our site, CRHE.org/research, we have kind of a landing page of all of our current studies and our work. We, of course, have the Homeschooling Invisible Children database, which is, looking at cases with the most kind of devastating outcomes where the child welfare safeguards that should be in place, their absence led to just horrific outcomes for kids. And that's always a hard one. We have a tremendous researcher who's kind of taken over that project, and she's just kind of, the way that she works with that sensitive information is something that I'm very inspired by. But yeah, so we do a lot, everything on outcomes, everything on homeschooling, from sex ed to educational neglect, all sorts of things. I'm trying to capture what hasn't been captured so far in the research.
I think that's what's really cool. And like, I remember reading, the Invisible Homeschool Child database, and like, it's a tough read. It's difficult, but it also, it helped me a lot because, again, I grew up, for a long time, I think I had a little bit of like the rose-colored glasses on when it came to my homeschool experience, and kind of thinking that was everybody's experience. And so as that's kind of shed, it doesn't take away from the fact that, like, I still had a positive experience, and I'm one of the lucky ones. And I was, I went to college, I have a career, like I launched into adulthood, like I did life. And, not everybody is as fortunate as that. And different, different things impact different people differently. Right. And so, but it's cool to see all of the stories, and to kind of, it helps me contextualize, okay, this is, it's not the same for everybody. That's okay. It doesn't mean mine's less valid. It's just different, and that's okay. But also to the point that we were kind of making earlier is like, we can also create safeguards so that those things don't happen, but also it doesn't take away from someone who had a positive experience like myself, right?
Exactly.
And just can add to that being a positive experience. And so I think that's really cool. And like you said, I'm sure that some of the research is going to show that, like, there's a lot of pros that come with being homeschooled, and from an educational perspective and things like that. And so, it's going to show a lot of different things. And I think that's the best part about like data. I nerd out on, like, I work in like the podcasting YouTube space. So like when I think of data, I think of like views and clicks and this and watch time and all those different things. And so, and how that paints, a very clear picture of like, hey, here's how to, we make changes in that content. And so that's kind of the way I view what you do for the homeschool world, is like, we can look at all of this, and as we dive into individual pieces of it, we can see, hey, if we make these changes here, it'll make this better. If we, leave this the way it is because it's good, and like it gives you kind of a really good picture of the homeschooling experience as it exists today. And so, I also encourage people, like, go sign up for the CRHE like newsletter, because I know you guys also send out opportunities to get involved in these types of things, and like, make your voices heard. Because that's, I think more and more alumni are starting to wake up to the fact that it's like, I got a story to tell, whether it's good, bad, or ugly, it's worth hearing in a lot of cases. And so, is there anything I recently had Tess on and we talked about the legislative wins. Um,
Hmm.
but is there anything I'm curious from a research perspective, or like, is there anything that you haven't researched that yet that you're like, okay, at some point I would love to kind of do a piece on this?
Yeah, absolutely. Thinking about surveying alumni and actually doing interviews and focus groups and asking about their transition to adulthood in more depth, and with specifically with an eye to what was lacking for them, if there was a lack, and if there wasn't a lack, if they did have adequate support, which forms of support were most helpful, because there need to be. I'm convinced through doing this work that there do need to be kind of tailored kind of resources for people, especially people who are educationally neglected or abused, people coming out of homeschool. But we need to actually consult the community there on what resources will be most effective. I also do really want, just as more of a personal kind of fascination, I do want to look into how people identify with homeschooling, whether they do or whether they don't, and why. And I think, these days as homeschooling is changing. It's becoming more diverse, both in terms of, demographics, motivations, geography, all of these things. With this new crop of homeschoolers kind of coming of age and, coming into adulthood, what is their perception of homeschooling? Because it's fluid, it's dynamic, it's not there's not a single homeschooling story. And this is why I really appreciate what you're doing here. And you talk to parents, you talk to people who are homeschooled, you talk to all sorts of people with different perspectives, to understand that this isn't one thing. I think people who had negative experiences or really devastating experiences, and I'm in this camp more on the negative side. It's really easy to kind of want to write off the whole thing. And I understand that and I empathize with that. And if you're not me and working on homeschool policy and research, and for you, it feels good to be anti homeschool, more power to you. I understand. I do understand that on a personal level. But what research enables, we often think of research in terms of just like stodgy, academic work that leads to data that no one cares about or can read. But for me, it's kind of cultivated this like humility almost of like my experience is mine, and it is an n of one, and there are people who share my experiences, there are communities and different trends that I'm a part of, but there's also things that are different. And research really is a tool for me to kind of, I don't know, just question my own biases. I went into this, I'm not even convinced that you can even, like, what even is homeschooling? You can get really philosophical with it, right? Because there's,
Yeah.
I mean, even just on the practice level, virtual schooling, micro schools, whatever, they kind of complicate the picture. But like people, it's so, and if I may just highlight, when we think about homeschooling invisible children and these cases of horrific abuse and neglect facilitated by a lack of safeguards, that experience is not the same as mine, even if mine was
Yeah.
negative, and
Right.
we can't claim those experiences as our own. All I can do is do my best to try and reconstruct them in a way that dignifies the victims and kind of clarifies the changes that need to happen. But to suggest that that's my story, or that my story can kind of follow from that, is not true.
Yeah.
And so research is just a really, when done right, not to say that I'm always doing it absolutely, perfectly, or that we always have things to learn, but like I think when you're on the right track, if you're questioning your own assumptions, your own position, your own biases, and getting a more complicated result, I think, and you have to be open to it, right? Like I don't know what my studies will find.
Yeah.
I have a sense, I have a hunch, but like being open to that new information, being willing to learn, that's kind of what it's all about. And that's why I really love with CRHE that research is a part of what we do. We're not a think
Yeah.
tank. We have policy goals. We believe that children have rights. We believe that we need stronger oversight to protect children's rights. We, have some pretty firm convictions that are, not going to change. And yes, of course, that influences what we look at, and we're very open about that. But that doesn't mean that we can't learn more, and that doesn't mean that we can't produce work that educates.
I think that's the great part is like, you like, again, the research like you said, research is something that, yeah, a lot of people go, well, is anyone going to read it? Is like, like, who is this for? And the reality is, like, what I see CRHE doing is taking that research and then creating actual practical legislation that can get implemented based off of that research and off of those lived experiences of people. And I think that that's what really sold it to me as like, okay, this is something I want to be involved in and I want to support, however I can, because I'm seeing action take place. And even when stuff doesn't get passed or, whatever, it's like, okay, but there's at least steps in that direction.
Right.
And so I think that again, that's the thing that really, really sold me on it. And to your point about, you know, more studies are going to come out, more stuff is going to happen. Hopefully this will also intrigue other people to like also do research, right? Like I think about that too. It's like
Absolutely.
homeschooling is becoming, like you said, it's becoming more popular. There's an explosion of it. What is homeschooling? I was even going to ask you that too. I'm like, it's such an umbrella. I had someone on. I talked to somebody who was like, I was homeschooled. I did online school. And I'm like, in my head, I go, that's not homeschooling. But then I
Right.
sat with it for a while and I was like, well, is it kind of, and so, even seeing that, I'm sure that's going to impact some of the research that you do as well of like, who identifies as a homeschooler and things like that, will be important as well. So anything else that I haven't asked about or touched on that you feel is important to this conversation?
No, this has been really wide ranging. And yeah, we've gotten to kind of, I initially, I was telling you before we recorded, that I thought this would be a little bit more of a professional. And I mean, there's certainly aspects of my professional life that we talked about. I thought that that would be kind of the focus of the interview, but it's so important, I'm realizing, to share my own story, because of course my story motivates what I do. And I'm more than happy to let people into why. So I'm really glad that that's been the focus, and really excited to be a part of this.
Well, thank you, Jonah. I appreciate that. I think the reason I like to highlight the story is because I think it humanizes people in a lot of ways because there's something we can relate to. Usually, we find the common threads in our experiences when we hear, a person's motivation. And so that's why I like to boil it down to that, at least to begin with for most people, because it is really that thing that it's like, someone is going to hear Jonah went through this or moved a bunch of times or,
Hmm.
did this and that and the other. And they're going to say, oh, yeah, me too. Like, and that's the thing that then, when we get to the like, well, what are we doing now and how are we changing things? I don't know. I think it gives people a little bit also more trust in who you are as a person to say, yeah, this is the correct person to be doing this job, to be making an impact because they have that lived experience.
Right.
Because if you were sitting here and you were somebody who's like, I have zero homeschool experience and I'm doing this
I
research,
don't
like,
even
I'm
care
not.
about this. I just work here. Yeah.
Yeah,
No.
exactly. And it's not to say that those people can't have an interest in understanding homeschool, but it hits a little different. To if you had a public schooler who's like, yeah, I'm going to research everything there is to know about
Hmm.
homeschooling. It's like,
Well, if we're
I'm
asking
not going to
people
buy
to
that
be
mission.
vulnerable and share their
Yep.
own experiences, including very painful ones, for the purpose of research, the very least that I can do is, return the favor,
Yeah.
reciprocate.
And I appreciate that. Jonah, this has been fun. And
Yeah, absolutely.
we might have to have you come back and we'll talk maybe more research or we'll talk some other topics at some point. But this has been fun.
Anytime.
I've enjoyed really getting to know you a lot better. And to the audience, yeah, go check out CRHE, see what they're doing. I'm gonna put links down below so you can go see the research that Jonah's doing. And yeah, it's really cool. It's cool to see like again how it's going to impact. If you haven't listened to my interviews with Tess Ulray, like go check those out. We talk not only about Tessa's experience as a homeschool kid, but also we have an episode when we talk on the legislation that has gotten passed or maybe failed on the floor and maybe why it failed and things like that and some stuff down the pipeline. And if you have a homeschool experience, if you have if you want to be a part of the research and you want to make your voice heard, like go subscribe to CRG newsletter because they're putting out the call for alumni to share their stories, and it's important. It makes a difference, and so whether it was good, whether it's bad, whether it was ugly, like It's all valid. It all needs to be said and put out there. So with that, I'm gonna let the audience go. Jonah, I'm gonna let you go. Thank you again for coming on the show.
Thank you. Thank you for
And
having me.
until next time, we'll see you guys. Peace.